Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tommy with Elevation Every Weekend here. In today's video, I just wanted to do a comparison video with my 2021 Salsa Beargrease and my 2021 Canyon Exceed CF7. Both of these bikes are carbon frame hardtails and both also occupy the same spot in their respective lines. The Exceed CF7 is the entry level of the carbon frame cross-country race bikes in Canyon's line. And the Salsa Beargrease Dior is also the entry level for their carbon race fat bikes. So as to why I chose to do this comparison, it's really just kind of an experiment and fun, but mainly I was interested to see how two bikes that are in very different categories but have very similar build concepts can compete or compare. On paper, the Exceed has the advantage in pretty much every way. It's about 5 pounds lighter overall. As a 29er, the Exceed also has a much lighter, less rolling resistance wheel and tire combination. The Exceed has an 11 to 50 rear cassette. It is a 12-speed, it is SRAM GX. By comparison, the Beargrease also has a similar range in the cassette. It's 11 to 51, but it's an 11-speed and it's Shimano Dior. The big difference here in the drivetrains is the front chainring. The Beargrease has a 30-tooth front chainring and the Exceed has a 34-tooth front chainring. So that is where the big difference is as far as top speed capability is based on gearing. So having ridden both these bikes considerably, I can tell you that they are very similar in that they both have very high quality carbon frames that are very stiff and very responsive as far as putting down the power when you're pedaling. The Beargrease obviously is a fully rigid bike, but the Exceed does have a front suspension fork. It's a RockShox Reba, which is a very good fork in my experience with it so far, and has 100 millimeters of travel. I did have the fork in lockout mode for this test, which almost entirely locks it out. Reason being, I just wanted to make sure I was getting maximum efficiency out of it. Before we get into the actual ride footage, I just want to give you a few specifics on the track and the test. So the lap I'm riding is about 5.5 miles total. It's basically a long, steady climb up to a turnaround point, and then you descend back down the way you came to the starting point. It is a dirt road, so most of it is hard-packed dirt, but there are a number of areas throughout where there's gravel and loose topsoil. I chose this route, which is a road, instead of doing one of the many trails nearby, just so I could eliminate and minimize the concerns about other trail users and having to slow down or whatnot, impacting the times. This way I knew that I could just ride all out, up and back. Now this test isn't as quite as scientific as it could have been if I had a power meter that I could really target my wattage for the entire ride and maintain that for both bikes. But I do ride this all the time. I'm very familiar with this lap and I have a really good feel for the output it takes. And as you'll see in my heart rate data, it was very consistent for both laps. So I feel like I did get a good fair comparison. So once I hit start on the watch, I just went as hard as I could on the way up and the way down. I did keep my hands on the grips at all times, so there wasn't any variability in the times as far as changing hand positions or getting into more aero positions or anything like that. Fortunately, the environmental conditions were essentially identical for both runs. It was overcast, about 60 degrees, and very light breeze. So nothing to really dramatically impact the outcomes. So let's take a quick look at some of the ride footage and then we'll come back and review the surprising results and give it some analysis. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the outcome and give it some analysis on why I think it was the way it was. Canyon did the lap in a time of 23 minutes and 50 seconds at an average speed of 13.8 miles per hour. The Salsa did the lap in 24 minutes and 15 seconds at an average speed of 13.6 miles an hour. So only a 25-second difference and a 0.2 mile per hour difference in average speed. Based on all the advantages the Canyon had on paper, I thought we'd be talking about a difference in minutes, not in seconds. So I was very surprised by how close it was. I actually did 3 runs. So the very first run I did was on the Canyon Exceed. I got a time of 24 minutes and 8 seconds on that. The second run was on the Salsa, which was the 24:15. Because the time came out so close, I was concerned that maybe I underserved the Canyon and didn't really get a good run in. So I actually did run the Canyon a 3rd time just to verify and ensure that I was getting a fair time. And that 3rd time, it did improve. That's when I got the 23:50. It did confirm I had a reasonably good run on the Exceed and where it stood. So taking that better time from the Exceed and the time from the Salsa Beargrease, I am confident I got a really fair result because my heart rate data was almost identical in average and peak for both runs. So this tells me I was putting out about the same cardio effort overall and at the top end, at the peak. For both runs on both bikes. So let's analyze it a little bit and discuss why I think that the results were much closer than I anticipated. Especially, like I mentioned, on paper the Canyon had all the advantages. One definite difference I felt in the 2 runs, and this may be a little bit anecdotal, but I think it probably had some bearing on why the Beargrease was able to hold its own. And that's that the Beargrease was much more stable and much smoother throughout the entirety, whether I was climbing or especially when I was descending and cornering. It had no issues with traction and felt really smooth, whereas the Canyon, especially in a few of the looser sections, the rockier sections and the cornering, I definitely was getting some unsettled chattering out of the rear end where it didn't feel stable. I feel like it wasn't carrying quite the speed that it should as a result. So basically I think there were some areas of the ride where the Beargrease actually did a better job at carrying its speed full through some of the rougher areas, whereas the Canyon did not. Even though I did say that most of this lap is hard packed dirt, there were a number of sections where they recently graded the road. They do that to clean up the potholes and the washboard, which gets really bad. And after they do that, it really does churn up a lot of loose rock and a loose layer of topsoil on the road. And there were a number of areas where I encountered that. And like I said, the Beargrease kind of plowed right through it, and the Canyon felt a little more unsettled. And a lot of those areas were in corners as well. And it just felt like that the Beargrease would rail around the corners at full speed, whereas the Canyon at times I felt like I would have to maybe ease back just a touch or take a wider line than anticipated to maintain stability and traction. Even though the Canyon did have the top speed advantage in the gearing, I do feel like there were some sections where the Beargrease probably just out of the mass and the taller tires had more momentum and just carried speed a little easier. Again, that's anecdotal and just a feeling I had, but again, there's probably something to it as it was much closer than I expected. So I think any of these things I mentioned by themselves are very minor, but I think if you total them up all together over the course of the ride, these were the things that closed the gap on the Exceed a little bit and let the Beargrease actually be fairly competitive. Well, I hope you found this little head-to-head video, this little experiment fun and interesting. If you did, please drop a like down below. If you have any questions, comments, or theories as to why you think it came out the way it did, please drop those down below. I have much more content coming with all of my bikes, and I'm actually also planning some more technical trail riding type head-to-head videos, which I think you might find interesting as well. So if you want to see those videos and follow along to my fat bike adventures and everything else that we're doing on the channel, definitely subscribe down below. It really helps out the channel. Thanks a lot and have a great day.